KOTLC Unlocked Chapter 10 Keef.
If okay, let's try this again, Kessler said, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. And I gotta say, I have a good feeling this time. I think we're finally onto something. But we'll know soon enough. Everybody earplugs in. Keef cringed as Kessler, Elwin, Roe, and Dex shoved the glittering blobs into their ears. He couldn't believe he'd let them talk him into sitting through more tests after what happened that morning. It had taken several panic-filled minutes for him to find the right command to snap the triplets out of whatever weird trance he'd put them in, and even though they'd laughed about how cool it was to watch everyone freaking out while they were stuck like statues, Keef was pretty sure he was going to have nightmares about frozen Disneys for the next few centuries. Especially since it seemed like whatever he'd done to the triplets had been different from when he'd numbed everyone, more like he'd ripped their emotions away, instead of dulling them. Which made sense, since he'd given a different command. But he didn't like having multiple ways to turn people into empty shells. And he definitely didn't want to discover any other methods. That was why he'd crawled into bed the second the Disneys left, hoping they'd give up on the whole project. But hours later they were back, and Keef had felt so much hope and conviction in the air that he didn't have the heart to tell them to go away. Plus, he wasn't quite ready to give up on the chance of finding some kind of solution. So he'd climbed onto Elwin's armchair, seriously questioning his life choices, particularly after he saw that Kessler had brought 5 new elixirs to test. Dex also had 2 new gadgets. And the triplets must have eaten a lot of sugar. So basically, there was no way this was going to end well. Ready, kids? Kessler asked, and when the triplets responded with an ear-rattling yes, he told them, okay, go ahead and grab on. Gah! Why are your hands always so freezing? Keef asked as Lex grabbed his left wrist, or he thought it was Lex. It was really hard to tell the triplets apart. Are they? Lex grabbed his brother's hand. Nah, he's just whining cause he's scared. Rex pulled his hand free and grabbed Keef's elbow, flooding Keef with that strange empty feeling again. And Bex's hand still seemed weirdly squishy. But Keef didn't mention any of that, since it was probably another way this new ability was getting stronger, and he wasn't in the mood to think about what that meant. He wasn't in the mood to think at all, now that he was getting hit with lightning bolts of the triplets' exuberance, mixed with tingly giddiness and rippling confidence and a heated sort of curiosity. It all kept building and building and building, like water rising up around him, drowning out all the air. It seemed like the orange elixir helped a little last time, Kessler shouted over the roaring in Keef's ears, so these first 3 are all variations of that same formula. The other 2 go in a totally different direction, in case we're still on the wrong path, but I don't think we are. Spoiler alert, they definitely were. The first elixir made everything spin and spin and spin so fast that Keef might have vomited if the command he was choking back hadn't closed off his throat. The second made his head pound so hard, he was ready to beg for relief, but he bit his tongue instead, letting the iron taste of blood distract him from the word crackling inside his brain. The third made him itchy. So itchy that Elwin had to pin his arms to stop him from scratching off his skin. Keef's eyes watered and his legs thrashed, and he knew there was only one way to end the agony, but he refused to say it. Refused to even let himself think it. It's all right, Kessler told him, placing a hand on Keef's shoulder. You're doing great. We're going to get you through this. But that wasn't true. It couldn't be. Not with Kessler's hand triggering that same hollow, empty feeling as Rex's grip. Keef knew what that was now. It had to be his body's way of telling him to give up. Stop fighting. Surrender to his new horrible reality. Hey, don't you give up, Kessler told him, like he knew what Keef was thinking. He pressed a cool vial against Keef's lips. We still have 2 more tries. Keef shook his head so hard, he spilled at least half of the medicine. Come on, Keef, Elwin told him. I know this is hard, but we're learning a lot. A laugh slipped through Keef's lips, and it felt as bitter as the elixir he swallowed, which burned like magma, making his eyes water as it seared his throat. But all that boiling pain at least scorched the word that had been forming, making it crumble to ash and dust. Well, that's something, Kessler said as Keefe slumped against his chair. Though it might not be an ideal solution. Last one for now. And this one should be gentler. Keefe didn't deserve gentle. But he definitely craved it. So he drank every drop, sighing as his body turned very, very heavy. His eyelids drooped, his limbs hung limp, and his breathing slowed and slowed and slowed some more. It felt like falling, and the darkness raced up to catch him. A soothing pool of black that swallowed him whole, until there was nothing left. Now he was safe. Everyone was safe. And the world was blissfully quiet. So was his tired brain, which slowly shut down. The darkness turned thicker and thicker while Keefe sank as far as he could go, hoping he'd never find a way back. He's finally awake, someone shouted, making Keefe groan as the much too loud voice sliced through his brain. He cracked his eyes open, sucking air through his teeth when the brightness blasted out everything. It took several painful blinks before the world faded into focus again, and Keefe realized he was back in his room, and if the crick in his neck was any indication, he'd been there for a while. You've been out for about 5 hours, Elwyn said, and Keefe's eyes darted toward the doorway to find the physician standing with a plate of food and a bottle of youth. Figured it'd be good to get some nutrients in your system before I give you any medicine for the headache and nausea. Keefe groaned. No more medicine. Hey, he speaks. Rose said. She didn't sound nearly as enthusiastic as she had been. Yeah, I know, Elwyn told Keefe. We've done a number on your system. But I'm only using normal remedies now. They'll help, I promise. Keefe was too tired to argue. The food and youth and elixirs actually did make him feel more normal. He even managed to sit up and comb his fingers through his sweaty hair. In case you're wondering, Elwyn said as he gathered the empty plates and vials, Kessler and I have decided to take a break from trying to treat your ability medicinally. I suppose we should have known better. Abilities are a part of who we are. They don't get affected by elixirs. We just thought yours might be different, since it's so unique. The better word would have been unnatural. But it wasn't safe for Keefe to say that. It was never going to be safe for him to speak. Or to be around people. Or to have any sort of physical contact. Or a life. Hey, Elwyn said, plopping down onto the bed. That doesn't mean we're giving up. In fact, Dex left something he wants you to test. Keefe shook his head harder, but Elwyn grabbed his hand, pressing something flat and cool and square into his palm. Relax, it's not one of his inventions. Dex wanted to make more tweaks to those before we try them. But he also had a theory that sounded pretty valid. Elwyn pulled back his arm, and Keefe stared at the small silver imparter. Dex thinks your commands will only work on people in the same room with you, since tone comes from emotion, Elwyn explained. He said you're probably transmitting some sort of emotional energy when you say the word, and that's what causes the reaction or helps, at least. And that's something that can't happen in an imparter conversation. He also said he knows you're going to shake your head when we tell you to test it, because you're scared and tired and convinced nothing is ever going to help, Ro added. So he said to tell you to trust the technopath and hail him once you wake up so he can say, I told you so. And I gotta say, I'm liking Techie Boy more and more. I think you should listen to him. So do I, Elwyn agreed. If you do end up commanding him, I'll be right here with earplugs in to help you figure out a counter command, but I don't think you're going to need me. Every time you've used your ability, I've felt a strange ripple pass through the room. So I think Dex is onto something with this theory. You also won't be able to feel what Dex is feeling, which is what seems to overwhelm you. But there's only one way to know for sure. Keefe tightened his grip on the imparter, knowing the smarter, Safer move would be to toss it against the wall as hard as he could, let it shatter into so many pieces, he'd never be able to use it. But a tiny spark of hope had been kindled again. Go on, hunky hair, Ro told him. I have a good feeling about this. Keith definitely didn't. But he still took a slow, calming breath, promising himself that if this failed, it would be his last test. He was giving one final try, one final push against what his mom had done to him. If it didn't work, it was ability restrictor time. He closed his eyes, trying to keep himself as relaxed as possible before he held the imparter up to his lips. His mouth was parched and his voice sounded raw and crackly as he whispered, "Show me Dex."